Okay, ji. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum to everyone, and I welcome you all to this seminar or webinar, which is third in our series of webinars that we are doing on Code of Ethics of ICAP. This webinar is on the topic of non-compliance with laws and regulation, a very important area of Code of Ethics, and somewhat complex, relatively complex as compared to other areas, because of the fact that application of laws and regulations sometimes require expertise which are beyond the accountant's normal training. And therefore, and in some cases, the responsibilities of the professional accountant goes beyond the professional standards, as also is envisaged in many other laws and regulations which also apply. So this area of Code of Ethics actually deals with a situation where a professional accountant, whether working as a practicing accountant or as an accountant in an industry, comes across a situation where he observes or she observes non-compliance with laws and regulations or any kind of illegal act. And those non-compliances may be safe for various kinds of laws and regulations, maybe environmental laws or labor laws or tax laws, and they can be laws, illegal acts like corruption, bribery, or money laundering. So all of these instances require a professional accountant to respond, and the Code of Ethics provides a comprehensive guidance as to what are the actions which are expected of the accountant in such situations. The Code of Ethics deals separately with situations for practicing accountant and also an accountant working for industry, where a non-compliance is committed maybe by his employer, organization. So we have a very diverse panel to discuss the challenges which may be faced by an accountant complying with the requirements of the Code of Ethics regarding the NOCLAR. So non-compliance with laws and regulations is commonly referred to as NOCLAR. And internationally, various changes were introduced a few years back in the auditing standards as well as the Code of Ethics, which are adopted by the ICAP and now are very much applicable for practicing accountants as well as the accountants in business. And the purpose of this session today is to brief you on all those requirements and then have a discussion about the challenges which we face practically by the accountants in complying with those provisions. We have, as per our usual plan, what we do is we have a brief presentation, and today we have two presentations, one dealing with the NOCLAR implications for practicing accountants, and the other dealing with the NOCLAR implications for professional in business working in industry. Once we will have presentations, and then we'll start and open our discussion with a panel that we have of experts, and we have people from practicing firms, we have legal expert, we have also accountants working in the firms. So first, I think to start with the webinar, I would like to invite for the first presentation, 𝗓𝗏 Jamil, who is a partner with GT, 𝗟R𝘄𝘀 Company, to take us through the provisions of the code which deals with the NOCLAR implications for practicing accountants and the audit profession. So 𝗓𝗏, over to you.
Thanks, Arslan. Okay, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum and good morning, everyone. So we can start our discussion with a brief background of NOCLAR. So this concept was first introduced by ICAP Code of Ethics in 2017, and with this introduction, IASB also made certain amendments in the ISA 250 which deals with the consideration of laws and regulations in an audit of the financial statements. This standard is applicable since December 2017. However, in Pakistan, the ICAP Code of Ethics was issued in 2019, in where ICAP included two very important sections, which deals with the responding to NOCLAR. So it is very important to understand that this is not a new concept. Actually, while we were performing the audits, we are supposed to follow auditing standards. So these requirements to consider the compliance of laws and regulations are already there. The code is only emphasizing on the documentation of NOCLAR. Okay, so now what is NOCLAR? It is defined as an act of omission or commission, intentional or intentional, committed by a client or employee, including by management and its those charged with governance, or by others working for or under the direction of the client or employer, which is contrary to prevailing laws or regulations. So this is a very self-explanatory definition. So meaning any non-compliance with the laws and regulations by entity will be classified as non-complier. And there are certain exceptions we will discuss when we move forward. So who should follow the requirements of this new code? So all chartered accountants in practice who are providing professional services to their clients and concerned parties, plus all chartered accountants in business who are providing their professional services to their employing organization and the concerned parties. So actually there are two sections. Section 360 deals with the chartered accountants in practice, and section 260 deals with the chartered accountants in business. And who are the concerned parties? So they can be classified as the client or the employing organization, those charged with governance. Mainly this includes the board of directors of that particular entity, the management, other individuals of that entity who are working directly under the control of that entity, or with any association with that entity. Meaning, if the company is using any services of a consultant who is not an employee of that entity, but for the purposes of these sections 360 and 260, he or she will also be covered. So I will be focusing my presentation on the chartered accountants in practice. So this normally includes the chartered accountants firms as a whole and the individual persons. Okay, so the scope is the scope of this section. It will be applicable. The NOCLAR requirements will be applicable to all audit clients, irrespective of their nature, their size. Meaning whether it is a listed entity, it is a public interest entity, or an unlisted entity. So the NOCLAR requirements will be applicable to those entities. However, now if a chartered accountant firm or a chartered accountant is providing advisory services to any entity, and that entity is not the audit client, also the audit client of that audit firm, so these NOCLAR requirements will not be triggered. The only requirement here is that that if they identify any non-compliance, they may consider reporting that to the external auditors of that entity. Similarly, if a chartered accountant or a firm become aware of any non-compliance relating to any other entity, and meaning that entity is not an audit client or advisory client, so there are no requirements to report non-compliances anywhere. NOCLAR requirements will be applicable to the group audit clients as similar to an individual client. So in this case, if there is a non-compliance of laws and regulations in any one entity, so the engagement, normally that engagement partner of that entity together with the group audit partner, they will be responsible for reporting that to take that forward. So in a chartered accountant firm or audit firm, you will find many employees who are not chartered accountants, but they are providing direct professional services. For instance, a tax advisor or a lawyer. So for this section, they will also be covered under NOCLAR requirements. However, if there are certain non-chartered accountants who are providing non-essential services, meaning the IT related services or admin services, so they will be scoped out from the requirements of NOCLAR. Okay, the objectives of NOCLAR are very similar to what we already have in the auditing standards, like mainly ISA 250, and which are to comply with the fundamental principles of integrity and professional behavior, because all chartered accountants are supposed to follow the requirements of all auditing standards together with the fundamental principles. Now, to alert the management or those charged governance to rectify or mitigate the consequences of the identified or suspected non-compliance. So they will help the management in rectification and the mitigation, or deter the non-compliance where it has not yet occurred. So probably this will be very rare that the chartered accountant can help in this case, but still there is a requirement here. So the protection of public interest from substantial harm. This is relatively a new concept, and we will not find this as such in the auditing standards. So what is public interest? Actually, there is no clear definition of public interest in ICAP Code of Ethics. So we can refer to the ICAP Code, which specifies that the public includes the widest possible scope of society, meaning shareholders, consumers, suppliers, and citizens. So now you can see here that normally when we audit the financial statements, we restrict our interest to the users of the financial statements. But now here, the definition or the scope is very broad because they are including citizens also. Interests are all things valued by individuals and by society. It could be financial interest or non-financial interest, and they will include rights and entitlements, economic freedom, political power. So we can define public interest as any benefit, whether it could be financial or non-financial, relating to a wide range of public, not restricted only to the users of the financial statements. And as the name suggests, the substantial harm are the serious adverse consequences to the entity or public in financial or non-financial terms. Again, financial or non-financial terms are important. And what could be the sources of these adverse consequences? They can be triggered through a fraud, environmental laws, health or safety of employees, public, threats to the client's license to operate, because in different entities, there are certain conditions if the entity is not fulfilling, so they could lose their license. Tax evasion, I think probably very common in this part of the world. Money laundering is again a new concept. Also, this is not a complete list. There could be other factors where the company, if the company is not in the compliance, so that could trigger also the response to the NOCLAR requirements. So this section 360 is applicable to the laws and regulations with direct effect on the financial statements, together with other laws and regulations which are related to operations of the audit client. So I think we can safely assume that most of the non-compliances will be covered under the first part, where there is a direct financial statements, because in all non-compliances there will be a effect on the financial statement. The best example could be if there is a non-compliance of income tax ordinance, and definitely that could trigger a non-provision in the financial statements. So that will be covered here. And for the operations of the audit client, meaning that there are certain entities who are required to provide or equip the entity with certain safety equipments, and if they are not doing that one, so they could lose the operations of the audit client. Operations of their operation, they could lose their operations. So meaning, so there will be no direct effect on the financial statements here, but as we just discussed, that the NOCLAR requirement will be equally applicable to the non-financial non-compliances, as they are covering the financial aspects. what are the responsibilities of a chartered accountant? So the first of all, the chartered accountants are not required to design any specific procedures to identify the potential nuclei. So
Sorry to interrupt. Sorry to interrupt. I think we have a feedback that the voice is very low. So if you can try to speak a little louder, I think it may help.
So is it better now?
Yeah, it's better because I think somehow the voice is coming from far.
Okay. So now. So I was just mentioning that the chartered accountants are not required to perform any additional procedures or design any audit procedures to identify any potential non-nuclear. However, because we are doing our audits under the auditing standards, and there are certain audit steps which we need to follow under ISA 250. So, and by doing so, if the chartered accountant becomes aware of any non-compliance, then it is his or her responsibility to report that non-compliance. So what non-compliances should be reported? The non-compliances that are not clearly inconsequential are required to report. So here probably I would say there is a slight difference between the NOCLAR in our country and auditing standards, because auditing standards clearly mention that the material non-compliances which have a financial statement effects should be reported. Now, again, this clearly inconsequential is a subjective term because this is not defined. So this could be taken as the materiality of the financial statements which the auditors are using, or probably they can take it a more cautious view, and they can include some other factors here, and they can go beyond the materiality considerations. The source of information is not important, meaning that if the auditor or chartered accountant becomes aware of any non-compliance, so normally we can think of that this is because of their own work procedures. However, if they are aware of this situation through any internet source or any social media, so and as long as that the source is credible, so they should also be reporting those non-compliances. The timing consideration, there is again a slight change with the auditing standards, because normally the chartered accountants and the auditors are required to report and perform the audit procedures up till the date of the audit report. However, as far as NOCLAR is concerned, so the date is not important. Even if a chartered accountant is becomes aware of any non-compliance after the signing of audit report, so the same considerations will be applicable as if he has identified that non-compliance before the signing of audit report. This is probably, I would say, the most important part of the presentation, that what should be the way forward if the auditor or the chartered accountant has concluded that there is a potential non-compliance. So first of all, the firm or the chartered accountant should discuss that potential nuclear with the management, try to understand their views, and discuss why they think that it is a potential non-compliance. And after that discussion, if they come up that the management is involved in this nuclear, so they should go to the upper level, which would be those charged with governance or the board of directors, and they should also consider discussing this with the internal auditor. In a very rare circumstance, I would say that if those charged with governance is involved, so the reporting authority is the relevant regulator of that potential nuclear. So meaning, if it is a corporate compliance, they can go to SCCP. If it is a financial or the banking related, SVP, and if it is any tax non-compliance, they can go to FBR. But before we go directly to the reporting regulator, there are certain considerations, very important considerations we need to follow. Okay, so first of all, the chartered accountant should consider the nature and significance of the matter. Now, if, for instance, if he has concluded that it is a potential or it is a no-clar, but significance is very important. Meaning if it is a clearly non-trivial non-compliance, so it is a possibility that they will not be reporting that to the regulatory authority. The credibility of evidence is very important, and this is again would be essential if the evidence is coming from the third party. So the chartered accountant should look very carefully what is the credibility of the third party who is providing that evidence. We can always discuss with the network firm, because definitely we can get feedback from different personnel, audit partners. Probably they have dealt this situation previously. So before going to the regulatory authority, it is better to discuss within the firm. Existence of appropriate authority. Now, if there is a non-compliance now, we have followed every step, but now we have concluded and we have identified rather that there is no appropriate authority to report. So in that case, probably this is the last, I would say, the course of action that maybe the chartered accountant or the professional firm could think of from the withdrawal from the engagement. But provided they have looked to every possibility, and if they still think that this is a very material no-clar, this has to be reported, but somehow they could not report it. So in that case, this withdrawal is an option, provided in that entity there is no law or regulation which is prohibited them to withdrawing from the engagement. Okay, so there are certain documentation requirement, and these documentation are in addition to the requirements which we normally have in the auditing standards. So, but they are not very comprehensive. These are very simple ones that the chartered accountant should document that how management or those chartered governors has responded to the matter, meaning that what is the conclusion reached, what is the conclusion from the management, whether they agree or they don't agree, the judgment used by the chartered accountant in practice. This will also include the credibility of the third party source if they are using a third party source, and the conclusions reached by the chartered accountant that it is a non-compliance of the laws and regulation, and it should be reported to a reporting regulator. Okay, now if we just summarize the discussion, so now we can easily conclude that the concept of this no-clar is that whenever there is a non-compliance of law or regulation, so the chartered accountant in practice, after performing certain procedures, should go and report this to a reporting authority. But now there is the challenge where the biggest challenge comes. Now, under Pakistan, the CA ordinance is the governing source for the chartered accountants, and that ordinance specifically prohibits disclosure of information about the client outside the entity, and the disclosure of the matter to an appropriate authority would also be precluded if doing so would be contrary to any law or regulation. So now what should we do? Now again, in Pakistan, so disclosure is only required if allowed under any law or regulation. And what I have seen that I think there are only two laws which will supersede the requirements of the Code of Ethics, and they are AML Act 2010 and Banking Company Ordinance 1962. So meaning if there are certain non-compliances relating to anti-money laundering or the banking transactions, so only in that case the auditor can go to the regulator. Otherwise, I think this is still a gray area that how should those non-compliances should be reported, and probably we will cover that part in our group discussion when we subsequently will have. So this will conclude my presentation. So Arslan, over to you again.
Okay, thank you so much, Khurram, for a very good overview of the provisions of the no-clar as carried in the Code of Ethics. I just want to highlight some of the key areas that you also pointed out, and rightly so. The auditor is not required to design procedures to detect non-compliance with laws and regulations. It's just that if during the course of an audit, the auditor observes any non-compliance or come across a situation where the non-compliance committed by a client, then the auditor has to consider the requirements of the NOCLAR provisions. But but another aspect of it is that the auditors are required under the auditing standards to understand the process and controls that the entity or the client has established to comply with the laws and regulations. So what kind of laws are applicable to the client? So in Pakistan, there are hundreds of laws and regulations. Just to have inventory of all those and federal and provincial laws which will be applicable to a client, even legal experts sometimes struggle to inventorize all the laws and regulations which may be applicable to a particular entity. So from that point of view, I think the challenge that what controls an entity or a company has put in place to understand all the repercussions of laws and regulations and adequate controls to comply and respond to those laws and regulations maybe in practice become a challenge sometimes. The second area is the confidentiality requirements under the CA ordinance, which requires an auditor not to divulge information which is obtained as part of the audit other than required by any other law. So which means that the auditor somehow has limitation not to divulge information to the regulator unless there is a specific requirement of any other law which obligates an auditor under that law to react and report. So which may, its interactions, the NOCLAR provisions interaction with the confidentiality provision of the CA ordinance sometimes may become very complex because these are both part of the laws and standards and which have to be complied by the professional accountant. And thirdly, I think determination of whether there is a non-compliance or if there is a non-compliance, but this is inconsequential or not, that require legal judgments because whether a particular situation is really a non-compliance of laws and regulations. For instance, AML laws, I think, there are sometimes situations are so complex to determine that whether there is a suspicious transaction or not a suspicious transaction, or tax laws which are subject to varied interpretations. So an auditor may need expertise or need to seek a professional advice even to determine whether there is a non-compliance or not. So these are some of the challenges which we'll take to our panel in the later part of the discussion. But now I think we can go to Safwan for his presentation on the NOCLAR provisions from another angle, which is the professional accountants working in industry. And if they face a situation where their employer organization has committed some kind of a non-compliance, or there is a behavior of which may fall under illegal act. So what are the how to respond to that situation, and how within the boundaries of the employment contract the chartered accountant can react. So over to you, Safwan, please.
Thank you, Arslan. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. First of all, I would like to thank ICAP for presenting me with this opportunity to discuss the ICAP guidelines related to responding to non-compliance with laws and regulations from an industry member's perspective. Many of the provisions of NOCLAR are similar for members working in practice or in profession or in business, but there are some unique challenges which are being faced by the members who are being employed in the industry. So my presentation would cover these unique challenges specific to chartered accountants in business. which are outlined in the roles and responsibilities required from chartered accountants in business as outlined in ICAP Code of Ethics, and possible challenges in implementing these guidelines. So just to start with, there is a recap of the objectives of the framework as applicable to all chartered accountants, whether they are in industry or profession. So the code outlines that all chartered accountants are expected to shall comply with the fundamental principles of integrity and professional behavior. So they are expected to be honest and straightforward in all their professional and business relationships, and they shall comply with the applicable laws and regulation. And in case the chartered accountant becomes aware of any compliance with any applicable law and regulation, he will have to inform the management or their superior, or to those who are charged with governance of the organization, to enable them to take remedial action or rectification measures to mitigate the consequences of non-compliance. Or in case it is a suspected non-compliance, they will take action to stop the happening of this commission of non-compliance. The board goes beyond these requirement and requires to disclose the non-compliance to appropriate authority under certain circumstances, which could be any regulatory authority. And in some cases, the chartered accountant in business may decide to resign from the employment depending upon the nature of the breach and the non-compliance. The code has further differentiated the guidelines between the senior chartered accountant in business and other chartered accountant in business. Senior chartered accountant in business are those which have the ability to make decisions related to the operations of the organizations, or they have the control of the entities' resources. They could be either directors or senior employees of the organizations, which are the senior management of the organizations. There are greater expectations from senior chartered accountants so that they can, due to their role and their sphere of influence in the organization, they can they are expected to work towards establishing the control framework to prevent the non-compliance in the organization. So moving on to the responsibilities of the senior chartered accountant in business. Once they become aware of any non-compliance or any suspected non-compliance, first thing to do is to understand the nature of the non-compliance and the related laws and regulation of this non-compliance. It is important that these laws can have either direct impact on the financial statements of the organization, or there are other laws which are directly related to the operations of the organizations. Chartered accountants are expected to have a level of understanding of the related laws according to their role in the organization. For example, if they are acting as a CFO, they are expected to know a greater understanding of taxation related laws and Code of Corporate Governance and Companies Act. However, if they are working as a head of operations or compliance function of a financial in a financial industry, then they are expected to know the let's say the anti-money laundering laws and other related laws as per their role in the organizations. So once they have obtained the understanding of the matter, they then need to raise the matter with their superiors or management or those charged with governance. In doing so, they will follow the established procedures of their organization. For example, some organizations have internal whistleblowing function to report such matters. So they will follow the protocols of whistleblowing function to report this matter with the management. The senior chartered accountants in business, due to their role and sphere of influence, are expected to take rectification or remedial actions within their organizations on their own, and they can further take actions to stop the happening of any suspected non-compliance. In some cases, if they feel the non-compliance is within the scope of external audit engagement, then they can discuss the matter with the external auditor as well. After completing the reporting requirement of this non-compliance or suspected non-compliance, the code requires them to take further actions if needed in public interest, depending upon the feedback or response they receive from the management or those charged with governance. In case the management decides to take the rectification measures, then they will not have to take further action. However, if otherwise, the chartered accountant determines that they'll have to take further action, there are following options, courses of further actions available to the chartered accountant in business. In case the organization is part of some a larger group, then they can inform the holding company or parent company of the organization in case they think or they comes to the conclusion that their organization is not taking the appropriate action against the non-compliance. In some cases, they can disclose the non-compliance to appropriate authority, which can be, as explained earlier by Mr. 𝗂𝗏 𝗵𝗟𝗄𝗀, which can be like State Bank of Pakistan or FBR or any other regulatory authority. There is a distinction there, confidentiality requirements, which we will discuss later as well, and as explained by Mr. 𝗂𝗏 𝗵𝗟𝗀 as well, that we will have to consider the requirements of any related laws, whether they require the disclosure or they do not require the disclosure. In some circumstances, the senior chartered accountant may decide to resign from the employment relationship, depending upon the nature of the breach. For example, if the organization is involved in some serious breaches like money laundering or other related breaches, then he may decide to resign from the employment relationship from the organization. Then there are other chartered accountant. The scope of other chartered accountant is much less than the senior chartered accountant. If they become aware of any non-compliance to law and regulation, they will have to do the same. They'll have to understand the nature of the non-compliance and related laws and regulation. They can seek professional advice from others within the organization, or they can consult some professional body to have an understanding of the nature of the non-compliance. In doing so, they will do it on a confidential basis. Then they can, after obtaining the nature of the non-compliance and understanding of the non-compliance, they can raise the matter with their superior. In case they suspect their superior is involved in the non-compliance, then they can inform the next higher level of authority in the organizations. Similarly, for other chartered accountants, if they feel depending upon the response of management and those charged with governance, they can determine if further action is needed in public interest, which may include disclosure of non-compliance to appropriate authority. The code encourages the documentation. The code encourages chartered accountants to document the whole process of reporting non-compliance, which include the matter itself, that is, what is the nature of non-compliance and related laws and regulation, the result of their discussions with their superiors, management, and those charged with governance, and the response of the management and those charged with governance against this non-compliance. And if further actions were taken, that is, if they decided to report it to the regulatory authority, what factors were considered to exercise this professional judgment. So all these things need to be documented in case these are required if in any legal proceedings. In ideal world, chartered accountants shall be encouraged to follow these guidelines. However, there are practical challenges which poses challenges to implementation of these guidelines. A few of them are presented here. Many organizations have same persons who are acting as management and board of directors, which may result if any intentional non-compliance is known to the chartered accountant, then there are chances that no action will be taken within the organization. Then not many organizations have independent whistle-blowing actions which have protocols to keep the whistleblower anonymous to avoid any biasness against them. No proper help desk or facilitation services from the regulatory or professional bodies if they want to obtain the understanding of the non-compliance and to obtain the understanding of the related law and regulation. Then if required, if in case they require the legal counsel, then it is very difficult and cumbersome process in our environment. Exercising professional judgment is also very subjective in nature. If they decide to take further action, then the factors considered to take those actions are mostly subjective in the nature. Depending upon the very complex nature of our laws and regulations, other persons would have different opinions against our professional judgment. In extreme cases, they may face the threat of unfair dismissal or termination from the employment, or they may face threat to their physical safety as well. Another challenge is support from regulatory or professional bodies is also required, as chartered accountants in business shall have to face the consequences as an individual as compared to like chartered accountants in profession where they can face it as an organization. These challenges are there, however, high ethical standards are expected from chartered accountants in business, so they can keep on playing the proactive role in facilitating the economic activity fairly and facilitate the organizations to act as responsible corporate citizens. So with it, I would conclude my presentation, and I think I have utilized my time effectively. Thank you. Over to you, Arslan.
Thank you, Safwan. I think it was, thank you for providing a good overview of the provisions applicable to accountants working in business and industry. And the situation is not less challenging for people working in the industry, because they are also faced with a challenge that if they come across such situations, to whom to report and whether they have adequate protection under the laws, because their employment may be jeopardized as well. And also, I think whether or not the entity has right process and like whistleblowing procedures in place, where laws and regulations or inappropriate behaviors can be reported, and there is a proper protocol and protection available or not. Where very few organizations in Pakistan have that, and therefore, in the absence of such policies and procedures within the entity they are working, what actions they can take in such a situation. Now, also, I think we are talking of an environment in our country where there is in certain situations a culture of non-compliance, and there is a prevalent culture where many of the organizations, especially in SME sector may believe that, there are certain laws where they can avoid compliance and on the basis of the cost benefit. So I think one of the questions somebody also asked through the chat box is that, why the 𝗏𝗏 provisions are applied or adopted in Pakistan when there are confidentiality considerations and requirements in our CA ordinance, and therefore the auditor is precluded from reporting any non-compliance to the regulatory authority in most of the situations. So I think the purpose of those requirements is not only to report to the regulatory authority, but when an auditor determines that there is a non-compliance, and non-compliance can be of different categories. So there are different categories of laws. The first category of law is where the non-compliance have a direct implication on the financial statements. So the laws like labor laws, which requires certain minimum obligations, financial obligation on an entity. Then there could be laws which affect the operating environment of an entity, like environmental laws and certain other implications which can affect the operating conditions of an entity or licensing conditions of an entity, and as a result there is a threat to even the going concern of an entity. And the third category may be where there are laws which have an impact on the integrity of the management, like money laundering or corruption or bribery. So in every situation, I think there are many courses available to the auditor, like reporting to those charged with governance, and also in some cases making sure that the financial statement adequately capture any financial impacts of such non-compliance. So there are many other courses available to the auditor or a professional accountant, rather than just only reporting to the public authorities. So now I will take these discussions forward with our panel. I think we have all kinds of experts from, we have legal expert, Mr. Ammar, very senior accountant, very senior lawyer, right? With wide experience in industry and also now in a practice. I think he can share his experiences around 𝗏𝗏. Then we have Amin Ali, who is a practicing accountant. We have Khurram Jamil also available for the discussion. Suhail Nisar has joined us from wide experience from the industry. So I think we can move to our panel discussion with these challenges and considerations. I think let's first start with the area relating to the professional accountants in practice. So the audit profession. So now Khurram and Amin, I think because since you belong to the audit profession, I think my question to you is that, when an auditor come across a situation where there is a non-compliance, and a non-compliance can be of varied nature. And given the confidentiality consideration under the CA ordinance, what is the course of action, or what is the thought process that an auditor is expected to apply in such situation? Is resigning from audit only the course of action which is available to the auditor, or reporting to the public authorities like SECP or State Bank is the only course of action available, or there is a wider thought process and approach which may be applied to such a situation? So Khurram and Amin, whoever wants to take it first, I think, please go ahead.
Okay, so Amin, would you like to respond first?
Sure.
Amin, yeah, please.
Ji. Achha, this is quite an interesting question. I think being bilingual is okay, or shall it be only in the English language?
Sure. Feel. Yeah, I think we all understand English and Urdu.
Actually, अगर हम कोड की इन रिक्वायरमेंट्स को देखें तो जैसे फर्म साहब ने पहले अपनी प्रेजेंटेशन में बताया कि ये रिक्वायरमेंट्स पहले भी थी, बट देयर आर्टिकुलेशन हैज बिकम मोर वाइब्रेंट इन द न्यू कोड। अगर हम तमाम रिक्वायरमेंट्स को देखें, जब हम नो क्लियर की बात करते हैं तो पहला इंप्रेशन हमारे जहन में ये आता है कि शायद वी आर जंपिंग टू द रिपोर्टिंग टू द रेगुलेटर, व्हिच आई बिलीव इज द लास्ट स्टेप। प्रैक्टिस में देखें फ्रॉम एन एसएमपी व्यू पॉइंट, फ्रॉम प्रैक्टिसिंग मेंबर व्यू पॉइंट, तो हम जो काम कोड ने इलेबोरेट किए हैं हम वो ऑलरेडी कर रहे होते हैं। This is not the final thing to resign from the client. This is a very like the last step and this is the ultimate step. लेकिन अगर उससे पहले देखें तो सबसे पहले तो कोड हमें ये कहता है कि you understand the matter. And when it comes to the understanding of the matter, कोड इस चीज को भी क्लैरिफाई करता है कि आप इसको अपने क्लाइंट के साथ डिस्कस करें और उसको भी एक मौका दें कि वो आपको आपकी अंडरस्टैंडिंग क्लियर कर सके। If the understanding of a practicing accountant is clear, then he may like stop, and if that understanding is not clear, only then he would further assess the matter. उस further assessment में भी वो इस चीज को देखेगा कि जो उसका perceived no clear है क्या वो हो चुका है या कि still this is like something जो कि वो अभी सोच रहा है कि ये होगा। In instances that commission has not happened, तो वो अपने client को educate कर सकता है। That is a further opportunity to the practicing member अपने क्लाइंट को इस चीज पे लेके आए कि यू कैन सीक द लीगल एडवाइस एंड देन यू कैन मूव फॉरवर्ड और यू कैन जस्ट चेंज योर प्रैक्टिस। तक भी चीजें सेटल हो जाती हैं, देन वी नीड टू मूव फॉरवर्ड। उसके बाद जो आखिरी दो स्टेप्स जिसमें कोड हमें क्लैरिटी से बताता है, रिपोर्टिंग टू द रेगुलेटर एंड देन रिजाइनिंग। रिजाइनिंग इज द वेरी लास्ट एंड अल्टीमेट स्टेप एंड दैट इज आई थिंक वेरी रेयर सर्कमस्टांसेस जहां पर कोई चीज इतनी ग्रेव हो रही है कि एक प्रैक्टिसिंग मेंबर को अपने आप को सेव करने के लिए भी रिजाइन करना जरूरी है। जब हम कॉन्फिडेंशियलिटी की बात की, जो भी बहुत सारी की, तो मेरा ख्याल है इस कोड की एक नई ब्यूटी ये है कि उसने कॉन्फिडेंशियलिटी के एडिशन में नो क्लियर को इंट्रोड्यूस किया है कि वेल कॉन्फिडेंशियलिटी इज देयर बट वेयर द लॉ रिक्वायर्स यू हैव टू डिस्क्लोज। तो मेरा ख्याल है कि जब हम रेजिग्नेशन की बात करते हैं द लास्ट स्टेप, उससे पहले इन सारे स्टेप्स को भी टेक इनटू अकाउंट करना पड़ेगा, बिकॉज इफ रेजिग्नेशन इन सच अ ग्रेव इंस्टेंस इज देयर तो फिर बाकी लॉज की एप्लीकेशन भी आ जाएगी, जैसे कि अभी हमने प्रेजेंटेशन में देखा कि एएमएल लॉज देन रिक्वायर यू कि आप इसको बाय एनी मींस रिपोर्ट करें। तो मेरा ख्याल है रेजिग्नेशन से पहले काफी रूम है जहां पर एक प्रैक्टिसिंग मेंबर अपने क्लाइंट की हैंड होल्डिंग करते हुए इन चीजों को सॉर्ट आउट कर सकता है। जी खुरम साहब।
Yeah, I think Amin has very rightly pointed out that the resignation or reporting to the regulator should be the last resort. Now, if what I've already covered in my presentation, that there are a number of factors which need to be considered first. Even if the chartered accountant has concluded that it is a no-clar, first of all, he or she should see that what is the potential significance of that no-clar. Meaning, if there is a no-clar, but it is very trivial, so I think going to the regulator or resigning from the engagement would not be a suitable course of action in this case. Plus, I think in most of the cases, when we discuss the potential no-clar with the management and then with those charged with governance, because definitely they are also very reasonable people sitting in the industry, and we just need to help them to understand that this is in the benefit of the organization, because no-clar includes also both intentional or unintentional. So we should not we should not be taking any conclusion that all no-clar should be intentional. So in this case, I would say that most of the cases we can resolve those non-compliances by discussing with those charged with governance, and going beyond that, in fact, before going to the regulator, there are other factors also that we should discuss with the legal counsel. We should discuss among the network of the audit firms that this is a matter, how should we deal. And one important factor is that the resigning from the audit client is not a substitute of reporting that to the regulator. Meaning that if auditor or chartered accountant has concluded that this is a no-clar and they have also decided to resign from the engagement and that decision has already been taken. So nothing will stop them to report that to the reporting regulator. So I think this is very important, that these are not two separate things. We can resign from the engagement, plus we can go to the regulator if we feel necessary that this is the last resort. And I think the most challenging fact is still that one, that where that it is not being allowed under the CA ordinance, other than where the laws and regulations permit us. Still, that is a very big area that that needs to be discussed. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
A very usual approach is normally, which is taken by the auditors and which can be taken by our auditors, rightly so, is to seek professional advice, legal advice, or recommend their clients to take legal advice in a situation where they suspect a non-compliance, and act according to the legal advice. What actions are required, even if there is a non-compliance, how that non-compliance can be mitigated, how that non-compliance can be reported. And if you have a professional advice, then it's easier to convince a client to act according to that legal advice to avoid any further exposure. And if there are financial implications in terms of penal actions or penalties, then a consideration can be that whether or not adequate financial liabilities or provisions have been booked in the financial statements or not. So I think we can certainly, as a profession, involve other experts, right, legal experts, to come to our rescue and provide a professional advice in a situation. Resignation is more associated with a situation where we have doubts on the integrity of the management, where the entity's behavior is that they are not willing to listen to the auditor, they are not willing to respond, or they see a non-compliance or illegal act as a valid behavior. And that is more a problematic situation, and where an auditor usually considers to resign, because where the repercussion on the integrity or approach of the management, then certainly an audit risk may become unmanageable. So now, how do you see the requirements of the CA ordinance, which deals with the confidentiality and not providing information unless we have a permission from the client? Is that something which is protecting the profession, or do you think that provision needs to be reconsidered as well in the light of the Code of Ethics internationally applicable in the NOPLAR area?
So I think the answer could be both yes and no, because like I just mentioned, that this is probably the biggest gray area relating to NOPLAR. That on one hand, we are governed by CA ordinance, which strictly prohibits us to report anything outside the entity. However, there are certain regulations and certain which will override the requirement of CA ordinance. So just to mention, like banking company ordinance and AML regulations. But now, other than these, now if we identify any potential non-compliance relating to the income tax and or a corporate non-compliance, what should we do? I think if we strictly stick to the regulations, in that case, the auditor or the chartered accountant cannot go to the regulator. And probably, I think here the legal view will be more important. But in my view, the chartered accountant, if he wants to go, but that regulation will prohibit him or her to going to the regulator.
Islam, if I can add something to it.
So, Rana Sahab, please.
Thank you very much, sir. Actually, you see, this confidentiality clause in our ordinance is the one which we inserted right from the inception. An ordinance was passed in 1961. So, of course, these NOPLAR developments are the latest ones, so we have to recoup with that. मेरा ख्याल है कि alignment की जरूरत पड़ेगी और वो नया ordinance जो हमारा इस वक्त in process है. I think that has opened up certain things. So then, of course, when that is passed and we get that flexibility to incorporate these changes, so definitely we'll be looking into it, and we will have to look into it. There has to be some. I mean, we can't have that type of strict restriction that you cannot disclose anything to anyone, because then purpose of the NOCLAR is not achieved. So you have to align with these changes, and of course we will be aligning our law with these changes as well going forward. We will have to.
Okay, thank you very much for this intervention. I think like most of the laws that we have are from old days. I think this particular law also requires a review with open mind, considering the international developments. I would now like to move to the other aspect, which is the accountants working in the industry, the challenges they face. And one of the challenges is that they also work under a framework. They also work within the employment contract, and that contract is also binding on them in terms of confidentiality of the information, in terms of acting in certain situations. So, and then there are policies of an entity dealing with fraudulent or instances or non-compliance with laws, like whistleblower protocol available. So within all that framework, do you think the accountants are best positioned to comply with the NOCLAR provisions? So Sohail, I think we.
Thank you, Arslan. I hope everybody is getting my getting the voice is clear. Well, so far as when law requires you to disclose any NOCLAR activity, when the law requires, just like anti-money laundering or terrorism financing sort of law, or these days NAB, then perhaps it overrides all the agreements you have signed for your job, for job contract purposes, because it overrides everything that necessitates. And similar laws, if they provide you the requirement to disclose such NOCLAR activities, perhaps then you should basically disclose those. And then it overrides, actually, it overrides your contracts, whatever you have signed.
Yes, I think you're right. To the extent there, the specific laws puts you under obligation to report, so that overrides. But in practical terms, when a person with a professional accountants report such instances, I think, is it practically possible within the environment that we are living in?
Well, most of the time, you are in corporate world, especially in good companies, you have the opportunity to raise the levels, to raise it to the audit committee and then to the board levels for senior chartered accountants in business. And yes, there is an opportunity also within the organization most of the time. And in case, if there is a major NOCLAR activity which has a significant impact on society or on the public as well, or any financial matter or anything, then I think the regulator is, despite that it is, if it is to be very significant, you have to disclose it and you have to take your high moral grounds. But yes, then you are exposed, in case if you disclose those NOCLAR activity to the regulator or to such institutions, then you are exposed to your unemployment or the risks of termination or whatever. But it is very remote chance. Usually it ends up within the organization, and when you report it, corrective actions are taken, things are taken up, and things are remedied.
Yeah, I think, and the most important thing is that as an accountant, I think ethics comes first, and we are expected to, perform, and we have to stand up against any illegal act. So I think in the end, I think doing the right thing is the purpose and the objective. which we all value much more in many situations. So I'll now take the discussion to on more legal aspect. So Mr. Ammar is with us. I think he's sitting with lots of books. So my question is regarding also one of the practical challenge that there are hundreds of federal and provincial laws and regulations operative in Pakistan. Now the first challenge may be for an accountant to determine that how many laws and regulations are applicable to an entity. Is there is that inventory available easily for say companies which are private companies which are listed? So all kinds of laws. Can there be a database at one place or repository available to start with?
Ji, Assalamu alaikum. I think I can. You can hear me. Now this comprehensive list of laws. So you said I'm sitting with books. So you have to actually sit on the books. So that is a difficult one. Let me say, just refer to one thing. If in this context you have an annual checklist on corporate governance for the board, that board has that is the board's compliance or board's performance you do every year, the companies do, and then the auditor also looks at it. How many boards have you found who have actually done a course on legal, invited a speaker, invited a lawyer, asking them where we are compliant, how many laws are applicable to us? Now, this is a tough one. Let me give you an example. Consumer companies, they go on air on television, they go on radio, they go in public through their advertisements. I have done a survey. Nobody knows there is, even some of the lawyers also who are not working in the commercial area, there is an Indecent Advertisement Act from the 1950s. You see, from the 1950s, you had this this Indecent Advertisement Act. Your Constitution of Islamic Republic came in 1973. Then you have all sorts of deceptive marketing laws and indecent laws, or whatever the laws which could be very much against your constitutional provisions and certain norms of the society. But this thing exists from the 1950s. So the boards of the consumer companies most of the time won't know there is a law like this. Now, compliance. So actually what happens that a specific industry, the board of a specific industry should try to get laws which are applicable to that particular, which are applicable in general to the industry, and then laws particular for that industry. I would like to dwell a little bit on confidentiality issue. Now in 1961, when this institute was formally born, a confidentiality clause was put in. What was the intention behind that piece of legislation, which you find discomforting or maybe protective, depends on your circumstances? Number one, that was like, if I am a chartered accountant, I'm auditing the accounts of your company, my spouse may be working with a competitor. The wife of my brother-in-law could be a supplier to one of the, maybe a supplier to my client. I may have friends who are in a competing business, or I may have friends who may be regulators. So it will be inappropriate for me to disclose any information, pass on any information. That is professional confidentiality. So even if you do not now amend your ordinance by accepting NOCLAR, the institute, by accepting NOCLAR as one of the standards applicable to its members, it has effectively amended its version of the law or interpretation of the law. Maybe you will have to do the ordinance thing or whatever, but you have created an exception and exemption. And that exception and exemption always existed. Suppose I am the auditor, I have a disagreement with you on a certain treatment. I think this is against the law. I do not resign. I publish a report, a qualified report. I do an emphasis of matter, or I do a disagreement of matter. What does that mean? I made the information public as an auditor. I was duty bound because I am acting as the agent of the shareholders who have appointed me. And the shareholders will only get my communication through an audit report. I think we should be clear on this. The CA ordinance is not an impediment. It was never an impediment in the implementation of NOCLAR. These are my views. I may be wrong, but just to ignite the discussion. The only big impediment, what I see from the chat and the question and answers which are on the screen, is that what are the consequences if I am a respectful citizen, I am an honest person, and what will happen if I report? So that is another thing which you will take up during question and answers, or when as a moderator you will do that. Now, giving you another example, I want to do it with examples. I have an agreement with certain set of distributors, suppliers, or whatever, which has got confidentiality agreement, which has got confidentiality clause and certain non-compete clauses. But then the agreements were signed 2 decades ago. We have a very good relationship. But what happens during the past 10 or 12 years when the competition law came in? Now, the agreements have to be disclosed to Competition Commission. Especially, you have to defend the non-compete clauses. So as a company, I say, no, I don't want to go there. But my supplier says, sorry, we have to go there because this is a legal requirement. There's a disagreement. I'll disclose. Now they disclose it to the Competition Commission, and Competition Commission holds a public inquiry. What do? There is no confidentiality. Confidentiality is not binding because the statute of competition law overrides your chartered accountant's ordinance. So I'll not take too much time. So let's go to another area. And thank you very much. If there's anything, let me know if you want further clarification.
I think, thank you very much. You raised a very important and valid point that the confidentiality have to be considered in the context of the public interest. So when the public interest is involved is not the breach of confidentiality, which will be seen as a right behavior from an accountant, because you're, as a paramount consideration, you have to act in the public interest as a responsible accountant who believes in ethics and compliance and laws and regulations. So the confidentiality clause is there to protect or preclude you from even an inappropriate behavior from which can jeopardize a client just because you have irresponsibly divulged information to somebody who should not be having that information. So I think you're quite right that we need to also keep in mind the paramount importance of public interest and whether our behavior is in the right direction or not. And this is a lot of judgment, and therefore, at many times, the accountants are advised to seek a legal proper advice, whether their professional behavior can be interpreted in a right way or not. And, then obviously, to disassociate yourself with such a situation is one of the options, but at the same time, if you're not speaking up where you're required to speak up as per the requirements of law, you can again be in trouble. Because if you see, say, any suspicious transaction, any money laundering, any bribery or corruption, you just move away from the situation. So then you have not completely acted in a public interest. And that behavior may be questionable because you're not contributing to the overall environment. Now, we as accountants obviously have a challenge that we are with that high level of corruption in the country. We've been our dealings with clients, with others. I think the practical issue is that culturally, in many situations, people feel that For example, I know personally people who think the compliance with tax law is not a crime, because I think I'm just avoiding tax. It is in the benefit of the company that I'm working for, or to save the tax for my shareholders, to maximize profit. So they come up with all those logics that enhancing the value for the shareholders, tweaking the situation in a way that save me from a financial burden at the cost of non-compliance with laws is perfectly all right. But obviously, we as professionals are expected to stand up to such situations. So I think we can also take that input, in our consideration, when we are making more documents or publications for guidance of our members. And one of the points that has been raised repeatedly is that whether or not ICAP can facilitate members in a situation where they face such non-compliances, or how to act or behave. But I think, unfortunately, the answer is no, because I think the position of ICAP, to my understanding, is that ICAP will limit itself to providing guidance in terms of the code of ethics, and then or any questions that anybody may have in interpretation of those code of ethics. But to step into a real situation will be stretching the role of ICAP as an institution. So that may not be possible, but from a technical and professional point of view, ICAP is willing to provide all the guidance in terms of the requirements of the professional standards. But there is, as I said, I think there are legal firms, good legal experts available to also help members in such situations. In terms of our overall compliance levels and members working in various organizations, I think they, as I think somebody pointed out, that their own policies, the policy of a company and the behavior of the board, etc., it becomes very, very important. And the Code of Corporate Governance requires the board to provide an oversight to the whole process of compliance with laws and regulations. And I think using those regulations, the accountants can escalate the matter to the highest level in the management and the board. That I'm sure would be seen as a right behavior in the public interest. So my other question is that from panelists is that about the SMEs. I think the profession, the small practices or medium-sized practices, they somehow sometimes feel a big challenge because they're working with organizations which are driven by owner, and where they face a lot of challenge whether they will be asked to leave the entity, or if they are auditor or consultant, they will be their contract will be cancelled just because they have raised this issue of non-compliance. Or so, do you see that there could be any special consideration where there is a threat to your business? Can there be any sympathy to such situations, Amar sir?
Yeah, this is like a sort of protective mechanism for raising a voice, a whistleblower protection. Now, this is a tough one. You raise a voice against a client. The client says, no, we are perfectly within our rights. You say, no, you are breaching a law. Now, this becomes a disagreement. But because of this disagreement, which may languish in the courts of law for 10 years, the client may not be obliged to keep you or retain you. Then this will again be a sort of forcing or thrusting a contract on someone. give you an example. The CEO of Olympus Japan resigned in 2012, Michael Woodford. Read his book. It is there. They are going to make a movie on that as well. So the day he blew the whistle in Japan, his own friends, which were of the same board, CEO, senior management level in Germany and UK, just ditched him within hours. So this apprehension that you will be ditched, you will be rebuked, you will be victimized. So this is something which is very true in life. And I see those discussion boards and question and answers where especially the PIB, the accountants in business, they fear the reprisals and they say that they will be fired. Now, whistleblowing protection mechanisms are there, but that is a problem how to implement them. Like there is a witness protection law in Pakistan now. After many years, they introduced a witness protection law. But people are not willing to testify in the court. They do not want to come out as witness for certain fears, certain problems. So it is actually the justice system which is implemented in a society, or a fairness system which is implemented in a profession, that guides you, that promotes you. And retaining a small clients after disagreement is a really tough one. And I don't think you can have a legislation where if you raise a voice, then that mandates that you will be retained for that client. Now it is like the same thing, that if you have a sour relationship with the management of a company where you have raised voice, how will you continue as their auditor or service provider? When the relationship turns sour, you cannot continue together. So that will always be a problem with whistleblowing or doing your job. Over to you.
Okay, I think somebody also raised this question. I think that he's working in an organization where the senior accountant or the CEO is least bothered about the rules and regulations, and he reported the matter to this SECP as well. And he is facing a revengeful kind of an attitude from CEO. He is not sure what to do with such a situation because obviously he may be fired as well if he resists too much in that environment. Now, what he should be doing in such a situation, because I think one thing I can certainly point out that he's not in a right environment. So, a situation can arise now or in the future that he may be dragged into a situation where he may not have committed anything wrong, but he will be alleged in a wrongdoing. So he's in a dangerous environment. So he's to think not only from an immediate job issue, but from a long term, whether he needs to be associated with such an entity. But over to you, Amar sir.
So with my experience, I have come across those examples and situations where people have been, rather, I would say, trapped in a situation where they don't find a way out. The shareholders of a company reported the mismanagement and non-payment of dividends, etc., to the regulator. And for years, the CEO and the management had been enjoying lucrative benefits going to the sky in that kind of business. But there was no response from the regulator. A reminder was sent, there was no response. Even the complaint was not acknowledged. So a lot of frustration. Now an employee raised, or a shareholder, somebody I cannot name, but he raised with the management the treatment of an accounting treatment in the financial statements. The management was ready to restate because of fear of the matter going public, but only on the pretext that it was a judgmental error. There was no judgmental error. It was stark and plain and on the record that was deliberate at some levels, and that was professional negligence at the other level. But the management does not recognize it. Now you go to the court and fight it out, whether it was professional deliberate negligence or whether it was a judgmental error. It will take you years down the road. So we have to live with this dilemma, and we have to live with this dilemma not here worldwide. The sociologists in UK, they have a study where they say that the white collar crime far outweighs the blue collar crime. The impact is much, but the blue collar crime gets caught most of the time, and the white collar crime, in most of the cases, they just evade any kind of penalty or prosecution, whatever. So this is something where there will be no legal answers, but if you are determined to fight, then of course one day you will win, your cause will win, but the damage would be there. And even you see legal, but going to a legal counsel would be expensive for a person. A company, an audit firm, a big audit firm would be okay. But then in such a situation where your reputation is at stake, your future is at stake, you have to find a proper counsel. And a proper counsel is expensive. Your salary is stopped or your services are terminated. You are already facing a cash backlash. And then you want to incur legal cost. So these questions will be there. Over to you.
So, Arslan, can I ask one question from Amar sir?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah,
Sure.
so Amar sir, in Pakistan, do we have any wrongful termination of the employees clause?
Sir, okay, so I am just dealing with a case with a very qualified chartered accountant, and wrongful termination and for whistleblowing, can't name it, of course, but the point is that they have terminated. You go to the court, fight it out, how many years down the lane? And then, to be honest, if there is another client that wanted to hire that person, fine, they will say he has got integrity, he has got honesty. But the other thing with the HR department, the human resource department will say, how do we know he's not a troublesome person? You see, the HR and the headhunters have their own criteria. They don't want the management to land into trouble, and tomorrow they don't want to hire you as a headhunter. They tell you, you had all the information, you didn't tell us, and you have landed us in trouble. So you see, these kind of things happen. So even if your contract has a clause, but that clause, you see, how will you implement that clause? That is an issue. Even you see that there is a judgment of the Supreme Court of 2013 that the contract employees employed by the government, now you see, from the days of Pervez Musharraf's regime and Shaukat when he was the prime minister, what they did, they said, we'll hire people on contract because appointing permanent employees in government is very difficult. So they started hiring professionals. And they said, like, even in FBR, let's go to FBR. At that time in FBR, a grade 20 officer equivalent to grade 20 would be getting at that time something like 70, 80,000, and those days 80, 90,000. But they used to employ people with a similar ranking, rubbing shoulders at 500,000, 700,000 qualified people who could do certain job. They did that job or not is separate thing. But when the contracts were terminated, they were put into trouble. The judgment came, you cannot seek reinstatement, you can only maximum sue for damages. And when you sue for damages, how many years you land in the court? Over to you.
I think you're very right that you have to be pragmatic also, and protect yourself first as well, because repercussions of doing certain act in a situation may also harm you personally. So any law or any regulation will not punish you if you're protecting yourself. And at the end of the day, I think what is the right thing to do and what is the right behavior is not easy to determine in a situation. And I think the idea is not to punish a person from one clause to other clause, but the idea is to see whether he has acted to the maximum extent possible, keeping in view the public interest, keeping in view the guidance that he has, and also keeping in view his protection, and what maximum he is expected to do, he has performed within that framework. I mean, that's what is expected. And that I am sure can be defended in any court of law as well. But we as professional accountants, I think, are expected to put integrity first. And when you are in a situation like such that where your senior is not, convinced that laws and regulations are important, then I think on a longer term, you need to think that you may be facing a challenge, for your career growth in that organization, and whether or not you really want to be associated. So you need to find another place for yourself over time so that you can move to a right environment.
Arsalan Sahab, I totally agree with you. May I add a thing here, if you are done? So, Khalid Sahab, you have done, you have hit the nail on the head. So, but one piece of advice which I may want to offer here is that when such a situation comes up, you go for advice. What should I do? This is non-compliance. Number one, this is non-compliance or not. Okay, what should I do? Okay, do this. But then again, the question you should ask is, if I do not act on this advice and it is difficult, the strict legal advice is go and tell the regulator. But what if I do not want to do this? That kind of advice should be sought. And you should find the advice from someone who can advise you, number one. Number two, if I do not go to the regulator, I might be breaching the law. I'll give you an example of, which is not in your list, is the ATA of 1997 Anti-Terrorist Act. You are working for an organization and they are financing an NGO. These days, it is a big issue. And then you suspect this NGO should not be financed because of certain reasons. You believe that could put the company in the trouble. And if you are an in-house accountant, you in the trouble tomorrow, because the ATA says that a person has to report it. And there have to be very sound reasons why you didn't report. Now, reporting to police is another thing. If you go and tell the police that this NGO is being financed, now you are in trouble because the NAB, the FIA, the police, they will come. You will be harassed like anything. It's not an easy thing to report anything to police. So if I do not report, I have told the management, I have cautioned them, now I don't want to report this. What should I do? So that is important, how you build your defenses. Because the foremost thing will always be contributory part of the contributory negligence in the crime. So ask the lawyer, how do you save yourself? Even if you cannot report, you don't have, you cannot, because your circumstances don't permit. It may not be wise to testify, then after reporting to testify. So how do you build your case that you did your job, you pointed out, what steps should you take to mitigate your risk? So mitigating the organization's risk is one thing, but mitigating your personal risk and stake is another thing which the accountants should look at, which the people should look at who get involved. Thank you.
Yeah, I think we should not all see a so cumbersome requirement, because it's very simple in a way that, you need to put yourself first and then the public interest, and then obviously what best you can act, and seek also, if their situation become complex, seek an legal advice. I think that's, I'm sure, the money well spent to save you from future problems from various agencies. So I've seen organizations where there have been frauds which are then investigated by different agencies, and the professionals are dragged into various hearings at, especially in the public sector. And they may be absolutely unaware of what is been happening, but they are part of it. So it's also important to keep yourself away from such requirement, from such a situations, for protection of your own self. And also, I think as an ecosystem, as professional chartered accountants, if we all start rejecting these behaviors, refusing to be associated with such environment, over time, I think it will increase the credibility of the profession. It will increase the value of the professionals from the government, from the regulators, from honest citizens, from private sector, etc. Because nobody wants to hire people with less integrity or honesty. So our honesty, integrity, and behavior, the higher the standards we follow, I think the higher would be the value in a long term. It may be difficult in a short run, but I think as a profession, we need to be part of this ecosystem which believes in transparency, which believes in ethical behavior and intolerance for illegal acts and corruption. And corruption is another, whether it's small scale or at a high scale. We have to deal with situations where such behaviors are observed, and so if we need to reject them and develop an ecosystem where we take a difficult route, but we don't pay an easy money to solve our issues. So I think,
sir, may I add one thing here? I'm sorry, I'm taking time, but just one thing to add to your discussion, which is very important, which will help these people who are putting these things on the discussion board. If you are in such a situation, then suppose you know that, suppose I have resigned from a place and the management says our accountant has resigned, now you come on. So is that not an unwritten code of conduct for the chartered accountants to ask the person who has left that why did you leave? So this is very important, to have a private discussion that why did you leave, number one. Now, my advice on this one, when you ask your predecessor, why did you leave this organization, it should be done very carefully. There are professional WhatsApp groups where people put those things, and then the madness starts. And what happens in certain cases, people have been served legal notices for defamation and libel and whatnot. So you have to be also careful. You may get the feedback about an organization, a management, a CEO or whatever, but you have to be very careful with that. Do not post things seeking advice on a WhatsApp group. What happens? That this company is bad or what? Just take advice from the predecessor or your close ones, and do not leave the trails on the Facebook and WhatsApp. And because at times those people who are igniting those discussions, they think they are being vindictive and they are vengeful, but they have been served with notices regarding defamation. And then they have landed in courts, although you finally chose, you will not go to the court because you cannot prove the documentation is not enough. The management is cunning. They will hire a battery of lawyers. They will damage you, but then they will come back and file defamation against you, action for libel and so many other things. So you have to be careful in getting the feedback and trying to defend yourself. Thank you.
So I think,
Stan, can I add one thing?
I think I also want to, because you work in a bank, and now I think bank is highly regulated with all sorts of laws, particularly in the recent wave. We have a lot of focus on the banks in terms of the money laundering issues. And being part of a bank, I think we feel that in general, the banking environment that we have that provide adequate framework for the employees to speak up in a situation and to report to the regulators or authorities which are responsible for protecting money laundering, because this information may be available to many of the employees that certain parts of the organization is not helping the cause of reducing money laundering. So you see in general that banks have a right frameworks in place, and whether they're open reporting to the regulators, etc.
Okay. Banks generally they do have a whistleblowing function. They are very regulated, and they have requirements from the regulator that they set up these protocols and these procedures, and which are inspected by the regulators during their inspection as well. So the banks particularly इनके जो systems और procedures हैं वो in place होते हैं as per regulator की requirement के. और banks में mandatory भी है whistleblowing function, और mostly they are headed by the chairman of the audit committee of the board, which is most of the times is an independent director. So banks में ये procedures और ये इसमें अभी एक चीज एक challenge जो सबसे ज़्यादा हम face कर रहे हैं, हमारी discussion का जो point है वो mostly reporting की तरफ जा रहा है. इसमें ज़रूरी नहीं है कि आपने अगर कोई non-compliance identify की है और management उसके ऊपर act upon ना करे. It could be unintentional, and you will be doing favor to the organization by reporting and by following these no-clear requirements. So in the end, when you feel that management is not responding appropriately to the non-compliance, the course of action should be first to decide whether it's a material non-compliance and which is detrimental to the public interest, which is very subjective in nature, but you can seek professional advice from the professionals as well, and then you may obtain the legal advice as well. Most in like just you mentioned anti-money laundering laws, the banks are very concerned about these regulations because of these FATF regulations. The State Bank is also pursuing these regulations very seriously. So it could disturb their operations, or it could maybe it could result in cancelling the license of the organization as well if they are found, if they are found in breach of serious regulations. So the banks, they are very careful, and they are have very regulated environment to protect the whoever reports the non-compliance. So I think banks are in a good place to be for a chartered accountant business. Otherwise, if I feel that you have to report some non-compliance to the regulator after following all the procedures before doing that, you have to take further action. Then you will have to take legal advice from someone. You will have to obtain professional advice. You will have to bear in mind the consequences of this decision. And if you feel that you're not in a right, as you said earlier, if you feel you're not in a right organization, then it will come back to you in future if you don't take action. So taking action is a good thing, but before taking action, you will have to prepare yourself for the consequences, and you will have to consider all your options before taking any action. Thank you.
Arsan, can I add one thing?
Yeah, sure, please.
So basically, I work in the profession, and I thought before today that responding to nuclear for a professional firm is very difficult. But after hearing the views of our friends in the business, so I thought that this for audit firm the environment is quite relaxed, because, like, for instance, if we are facing certain problems, so the consequences for the firm are limited to the consequences our friends will be facing in the industry, because their whole career is on the threat. So what I think, because you see, we have a very small fraternity, 10,000, 12,000 members. So we should rather come up with a certain mechanism to protect the rights of our members. I think probably we can touch base with the respective regulators to give some protection to the person who is whistleblowing, or that the respective regulators, they can come up with certain relaxation or certain rights to that person. So otherwise, probably what I feel that currently it is, I would say in terms of percentage, it would be a very low percentage that the person will come forward with if he or she will find any non-compliances with their respective organizations.
I think you're right. I think we have seen from audit profession point of view, I think we have seen situations where the auditors have resigned, and then when a new auditor comes in, there is a channel available to the new auditor asking information from the old auditor for the reasons of resignation. I think that also can help him navigate the risks associated with the entity. And also the biggest, I think, tool available with the auditor is to report. So he can report at various places, from audit report to management letter to the communication with the board. And also, reporting the matter can also in some way help resolving the issue, because then you're also making the board aware that you will be responsible in the future if even after knowing the full matter you have not acted. So I think that way pursue them, that way pressurize them to really react to the situation, because nobody wants to put himself in a difficult spot. So yes, but the responsibility with the profession is much bigger, because they are dealing in many organizations, and they are in a position of public interest and their job is to report certain compliances as well with the corporate laws, and in some cases detect the tax laws as well. So I think this issue and this subject is very extensive, and it can very well go beyond the boundaries of the professional standards. And but I think at least from this session today, we all know that what are the challenges and what are the areas and where the guidance lies, and what approaches should be most appropriate in a situation where you find yourself regarding compliances. So I think with that, we are almost coming to the conclusion of our webinar today. I would like now, because Rana Saab is also available with us, who is the chair of the Auditing Standards Committee and part of the council. So I would request him to share his views on this subject as well.
Yes, thank you very much, Aslan. Can you hear me?
But I think a little louder will help.
Okay, I'll try to. So, is it better now? Okay, thank you very much. Bismillahir-Rahmanir-Rahim. Respectable speakers, I can see Mr. Khaja Safwan, Khurram, Amin, and the panelists, and very importantly, 𝗏𝗓. The input has been really good. And the participants, thank you very much, and welcome to this webinar of ICAP on Code of Ethics. As you all know, this is a series of webinars actually we have launched. This is third in the series, and inshallah we are going to have 2 more at least. But of course, if some other topic emerges, we can have further webinars or activities as well. One is, of course, the accountants in practice as a whole. Actually, abhi tak agar aap dekhen, whatever we have covered is mostly focusing on accountants in practice. But accountants in business, of course, other than NOCLAR, there are a number of things that they have to comply with, and there are a number of requirements. And the challenges actually they are facing is, again, are not less than what accountants in practice are facing. So there has to be some comprehensive activity covering all those requirements, which are there from our accountants or members working in industry or in business. From practice, actually, there is another area which we feel is yet to be covered is the other services, actually, non-assurance services. When you are providing assurance services, along with that, there are non-assurance services. So there is a relationship with your clients. So that is another area which we feel is to be covered. So inshallah, we are also hoping to have another activity on this. So these are two activities which are there in the pipeline. And inshallah, in the coming weeks or months, you will witness those. Coming to this topic, actually, before coming to this topic, we all know that why we are having these activities, why we have code of ethics, why we have, let's say, some other guidance material in code of ethics. We all know that accountants have important and key role to play, whether they are working in industry or they are working, let's say, as practitioner, they're providing assurance services or non-assurance services. So they have a key role number of times. Their positions are very key positions, actually. They access certain information which is very critical. They become aware of certain activities which are going on in industry where they're working, or their clients, which generally is not privy to, I mean, the general public is not, let's say, having that privilege to access that. So once, if you look at this position, which is a privileged position, then you have to, come up with privileged action as well. So actions also have to correspond to this position. So as 𝗟𝘂 said in the beginning that, for example, the confidentiality thing, when it was introduced, the concept was that you are auditor, you have relatives, you have friends, which can, let's say, can be engaged into same sort of business. They can always come to you and ask, okay, you are the auditor of this company, so give us some tips. Tips could be, let's say, their secrets. Their tips could be their, formulas. Tips could be on times what is the number of the profit, because they're investing in stock exchanges shares, so they are interested to know all this. So you are privileged to have that information because of your position, and that can be misused. So then there has to be a framework to tell you that how you have to act, where you have to stop, what information you can keep to yourself. Can you use that information for yourself? And of course, what information can be shared. So this all framework, and this is one situation, but there are a number of other situations which have ultimately made us to come up with this code of ethics which we have today. And this 𝗏𝗏 thing, of course, is something which is not the new concept. It is there. When there are laws, there are compliances, there are non-compliances. So if you have one law, there will be chances of non-compliance with one law. If you have 1,000 laws, so there will be chances of non-compliance with 1,000 laws. And why we make laws? 𝗟𝘂 has very ably explained that you want to keep this human being into a framework. Otherwise, if you allow a human being to act like anything, so it will be east and west and north and south, so there will be no boundaries. There will be no check and balances, whether we are, let's say, hitting others, whether we are impacting others' rights, what are our obligations, what are our rights. So this all has to be defined. You want to keep this human being into, let's say, some framework. So if there will be a framework, there will be a tendency of non-compliance. So this is very natural. It was there, it is there, it will remain there. You make, number of frameworks, you make number of laws. And in my view, if you make more laws, there'll be more possibility of non-compliance. So, this is a natural process. This is a circle which we are into. And we will keep on, let's say, moving into this circle. So, ये सिलसिला है, था, इसने रहना है. But this 𝗏𝗏 thing, or the, let's say, prescription for accountants is coming from where? We have a key position. We are performing certain roles. And then there are certain laws and regulations. And there was no framework earlier available. So for example, there is a non-compliance. Somebody will come up and say, accountant had a role to play. आपने क्या किया? आप तो वहाँ पे auditor थे. आपने इसको देखा कि नहीं देखा? So, there were no boundaries actually. So accountants used to think about it, okay, हमारी जिम्मेदारी ज़रूर है, but what could be that जिम्मेदारी? What is the framework available? हमें करना क्या चाहिए? So there has been a thought process over long, and ultimately accounting profession came up with this thing. Okay, this is now a framework. Guideline has been given. If you encounter, because of your position, certain non-compliances, you have to do this, you have to do this, you have to do this, you have to do this. Ab 𝗏𝗏 की presence में basically, it is not something new law or new requirement. In my view, it is a framework. Now things have been defined actually. पहले डिफाइंड नहीं थी. नॉन कंप्लायंस आप पहले भी करते थे, आपको कहीं ना कहीं उसका इम्पैक्ट आता था. लाइक कमाल साहब ने वेरी राइटली सेड कि अगर कोई नॉन कंप्लायंस हो रही थी तो हम क्या करते थे, हम अपनी रिपोर्ट में क्वालिफाई करते थे. तो क्या हमें रिपोर्ट की क्वालिफिकेशन तक लेके जाना है या उसको पीछे रोकना है, या उससे पहले भी कुछ स्टेप्स अवेलेबल हैं टू एड्रेस दैट नॉन कंप्लायंस. दिस ऑल हैज बीन नाउ पुट इनटू दिस फ्रेमवर्क जिसको हम नौकलार की बात करें. सो और नौकलार इज नॉट अ लोकल फिनोमिना. हम अपनी सोसाइटी को बिल्कुल कह सकते हैं कि यहाँ पर टेंडेंसी ऑफ नॉन कंप्लायंस बहुत है, प्रोफेशन में भी है, इंडस्ट्री में भी है, बट इन नॉन कंप्लायंस की टेंडेंसी इज देयर वेयर ह्यूमन बीइंग इज. ये यूएस में भी ऐसी है, यूके में भी ऐसी है. ये you just think of any jurisdiction, you will find this non-compliance thing. So basically NOCLAR is a global framework which accountants have developed. And definitely this is a new phenomena for us as well. We have to know about it. हमें पता, जितना ज़्यादा हम इसका knowledge लेंगे उतनी proficiency increase करेगी, उतना हम compliance की तरफ जाएंगे, उतना ही definitely हम ethical conduct की तरफ जाएंगे. So this is the objective basically. I think ये हमारा तीसरा या चौथा नौकलार के ऊपर एक activity है. And we have been facing these questions right from the first activity we had on this नौकलार. ये अच्छा, फिर एक और चीज समझने वाली है, क्या ये नॉन कंप्लायंस ऐसी है कि 100% नॉन कंप्लायंस हो रही है? हर ऑर्गेनाइजेशन ये करती है कि नॉन कंप्लायंस करेगी और आप रिपोर्ट करेंगे और वो आपको लेट्स से उसकी पनिशमेंट करेंगे. दैट इज नॉट द केस. आप अपना करियर देखें, अपनी लाइफ देखें. जनरल टेंडेंसी इज टू कंप्लाई विद. अगर ये 1000 लेट्स से लॉज हैं, ये 2000 लॉज हैं, जनरल टेंडेंसी इज टू कंप्लाई विद दिस. बिकॉज अगर आप कंप्लायंस नहीं करेंगे so you will not be a good businessman, you will not be a good corporate citizen, you will not be a good professional. General tendency ये है, लेकिन within that there could be intentional or there could be unintentional non-compliances. So when there is a non-compliance, being an accountant, हम profession में हैं या business में हैं, employment में हैं, we have a role to play. और नौकलार basically is prescribing a framework कि हमें अपना वो role कैसे play करें. I think this is something. और ये एक्टिविटी में जब हम यहाँ ICAP के फोरम से बैठ के देखते हैं, ग्लोबल जुरिसडिक्शंस में भी दे आर स्टिल इन द प्रोसेस ऑफ लेट्स से फैमिलियराइजिंग विद ऑल दीज रिक्वायरमेंट्स, और इसके अपने चैलेंजेस हैं. साफा रीजन हमारा जो है उन बॉडीज के साथ जब आप इंटरेक्ट करते हैं तो दे हैव दीज चैलेंजेस जिस तरह हमारे पास भी हैं. तो दे आर ऑल्सो लेट्स से कोलेटिंग दीज थिंग्स कि जी 2 साल से 3 साल से जब ये रिक्वायरमेंट आई है तो अब तक अकाउंटेंट्स के क्या ऐसे इंसिडेंट्स हुए हैं कि जहां वो नॉन कंप्लायंस उन्होंने रिपोर्ट की, उसके कंसिक्वेंसेस हुए, व्हाट अकाउंटिंग बॉडीज हैव डन, व्हाट रेगुलेटर्स हैव डन, गवर्नमेंट ने वहां पे क्या रोल प्ले किया. वी आर आल्सो कलेक्टिंग दैट इंफॉर्मेशन, डेटा ऑफ कोर्स. हम इसी बेस पे अपने लिए भी जो एक स्टेप है, दिस इज द फर्स्ट स्टेप. नौकलार आ गया, इम्प्लीमेंट हो गया, बट ऑफ कोर्स नाउ गोइंग फॉरवर्ड जब चैलेंजेस आएंगे, डिफिकल्टीज आएंगी, तो एज एन अकाउंटिंग प्रोफेशनल बॉडी हमें अपना रोल प्ले करना है. वी विल डेफिनेटली फाइंड आउट सोल्यूशंस. हमें क्या फ्रेमवर्क में एक्सटेंशंस करनी है, लॉ में क्या प्रोविजंस का चेंज करना है, व्हाट टाइप ऑफ प्रोटेक्शंस वी शुड बी सीकिंग फ्रॉम लेट्स से रेगुलेटर्स ऑफ द गवर्नमेंट, हम एज ICAP उसमें क्या रोल प्ले कर सकते हैं. बट बॉटम लाइन विल रिमेन, वी हैव बीन ट्रीटेड, वी हैव बीन कंसिडर्ड एज अ कंप्लायंट सिटीजन एज ऑलवेज, और हमें आज भी वही रोल प्ले करना. और इस फ्रेमवर्क को फॉलो करते हुए अगर हम कोई नॉन कंप्लायंस ऑब्जर्व करते हैं, इनकाउंटर करते हैं, तो डेफिनेटली वी हैव टू डील विद दैट अकॉर्डिंग टू दिस गाइडलाइन. इसके लिए हमने और भी बहुत सारा गाइडिंग मटेरियल डेवलप किया है, FAQs भी डेवलप किए हैं, एग्जाम्पल्स के साथ केस स्टडीज भी हैं, ICAP की वेबसाइट पे अवेलेबल हैं. हमारी ये आई थिंक 4th-5th एक्टिविटी है ऑन दिस नौकलार. इसके अलावा भी अगर कोई आपको गाइडेंस मटेरियल की जरूरत पड़ेगी तो डेफिनेटली वी आर अवेलेबल. आप अपनी क्वेरीज, क्वेश्चंस आप हमें भिजवाएंगे, डेफिनेटली वी विल डेवलप फर्दर गाइडलाइंस. यही ऑब्जेक्टिव है. जितना नॉलेज गेन करेंगे उतनी प्रोफिशिएंसी डेफिनेटली गेन करेंगे. जितनी प्रोफिशिएंसी आएगी उतनी ही कंप्लायंस इंश्योर होगी, जितनी कंप्लायंस इंश्योर होगी उतने ही अच्छे प्रोफेशनल के तौर पे हम एज अ कॉर्पोरेट सिटीजन एज ए प्रोफेशनल बिहेव कर रहे होंगे, अपनी ऑर्गेनाइजेशंस को सपोर्ट कर रहे होंगे। लेकिन जहाँ ये एक्सपीरियंस है ना, जो क्वेश्चंस मैं कुछ देख रहा था कि जी मैंने तो क्वेश्चन रेज किया, मेरे सीईओ ने मुझे उसके ऊपर जो है वो बड़ा रिएक्शन दिया और मैं तो मेरी जॉब चली गई। बट एट द सेम टाइम आई हैव लॉट ऑफ एग्जांपल्स के जहाँ उन्होंने इनकरेज किया कि अगर कोई नॉन कंप्लायंस हो रही है तो आप हमें बताएं, सो दैट हम एज ए कॉर्पोरेट सिटीजन किसी नॉन कंप्लायंस में न जाए। तो ये एक बैटल है, कंप्लायंस नॉन कंप्लायंस की बैटल, जहाँ ह्यूमन होगा इट विल बी देयर और ये चलती रहेगी। लेकिन हम बीइंग अकाउंटेंट चूंकि एक की रोल प्ले करते हैं, की पोजीशंस होल्ड करते हैं, क्रिटिकल डिसीजन मेकिंग, क्रिटिकल टीम का पार्ट होते हैं बेसिकली, डेफिनेटली फिर हमारा रोल भी क्रिटिकल होगा, हमारी उसमें इन्वॉल्वमेंट भी एक चैलेंजिंग लेवल पे होगी। उसी कॉन्टेक्स्ट में हमें अपने फ्रेमवर्क भी डेवलप करना होंगे, उसी कॉन्टेक्स्ट में हमें अपना कंडक्ट भी इम्प्रूव करना होगा। तो आई थिंक टेक्निकली तो बहुत कुछ बात हो गई। थैंक यू वेरी मच अगेन, वंस अगेन मार साहब, खासतौर पे आपने माशाल्लाह बहुत अच्छा इनपुट दिया। सोहेल, निसार, सफवान, खुरम, अमीन, अरसलान, आप तो हमेशा ही बहुत टाइम देते हो, थैंक यू वेरी मच। आप अगेन ICAP secretariat as well, and very importantly all the participants जिन्होंने टाइम निकाला, and this shows कि जी हम कितना कीन हैं to learn all this, and definitely अगर हम लर्निंग के लिए कीन हैं तो हम कंप्लायंस के लिए भी कीन होंगे। सिचुएशंस डिफिकल्ट आती रहेंगी, पहले भी आती रही हैं, आज भी हैं, कल भी आएंगी। डेफिनेटली वी एज प्रोफेशनल अगर हम प्रिविलेजेस एंजॉय करते हैं तो हम ऑब्लिगेशंस भी डेफिनेटली कैरी करते हैं, एंड वी हैव टू डू गुड विद दोज ऑब्लिगेशंस एज वेल। With this, thank you very much once again, and back to you, Arslan. Stay safe, stay blessed, and good luck to all of you. And inshallah, look forward to see you again when we have these activities rolled out. Thank you very much, Arslan. Back to you.
Thank you very much. I think it was really nice to have all of you here, and a very good interaction. I'm sure, I think will be useful for our members as well. I personally enjoyed the discussion as well. So thank you all. I think our time limit is now perhaps over. So we will be leaving you for today. Thank you so much.
Okay, ji. Thank you. Allah Hafiz. Take care. Stay blessed. Allah Hafiz.
Allah Hafiz.
Thank you. Allah Hafiz.
Allah Hafiz.
Allah Hafiz. Allah Hafiz.